us here today to learn more about effective storytelling. I'm Kelly Grover. I'm the CEO of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. Everyone who lives with cystic fibrosis, whether you're diagnosed with CF or you're a family or a friend, you have a story. And it's your story of how CF impacts you and your life that our elected representatives or bureaucrats need to hear. It is through your story that those who make decisions will understand why change is needed. Sometimes, though, people aren't sure about how best to share their life experience. What should you share? How should you start? What's the most important thing to include? Telling your story might sound easy to some, but for many others, it can be a challenge. And that's why we're here today. We want to share with you some tips on how best to share your story of living with cystic fibrosis. You're going to hear from some members of the CF community on how they've carved their story over time and how they share their information to advance change. We hope at the end of this recording that you will have the information you need and the added confidence to get out there and share your story. And I know for many, doing that can be a very empowering and satisfying experience. So first, we're going to hear from Kim Steele, our Director of Government and Community Relations at CF Canada. And then we're going to hear from members of our CF community, Lilia Zahareva, Abby McPhee, and Kimberly and Cassidy Evans. And after, we will answer some commonly asked questions. So now over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. Can everybody see the slide deck? Great, thanks. So to help you tell your story, we are going to focus on improving access to CF medicines as part of our participation in the CF Can't Wait Provincial Meeting Challenge. So we're here today to really, as Kelly said, to help you tell your story with key decision makers, namely politicians. So Nancy Girardi is a person who helps people tell their stories for change for a living. And the key learning here in her quote, your ability to shape your future depends on how well you communicate where you want to be when you get there. When ideas are communicated effectively, people follow and change. So her key learning is really that we need to imagine and effectively describe our future. And that's how we get the change we need now, because we're going to help people envision it and see and feel the future that we want. Another master in storytelling, Nat Kendall Taylor, makes a living out of helping people frame their stories largely for social change. And what he has to say really is that how we frame our stories can really dramatically change how people feel and think and perceive reality, really. And what we need to do is, when we sit with decision makers, we need to bring our heart and our head and help them feel and think the way we are thinking and feeling, but also how we want them to. And he's shown through his research that stories that offer solutions and emotion land better than stories that bring emotion alone. So as we're thinking about that future, we need to also think about the steps that we want our politicians to take to help us get there, and we need to describe them as part of our stories. Elements of persuasive storytelling. Simple structure, have a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. I myself am a bit of a meanderer, so this is one that I always have to work on when I go into meetings with elected officials. I need to really establish that beginning, and I need to also hook that person, that elected official who's sitting across from me. And the way, to do that is to lead with a powerful opening about who you are, why you're here, and then go, here's what we'd like to talk to you about today. I'm here today because we need access to these game-changing therapies. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and why I need access, or why I want to help other people get access to this medicine. Again, simple structure, grow the overall theme of your story. So if you're thinking about access, think about how do you warm the ground on the discussion of access? Does it start when you didn't have access? Does it start when you got access? Does it start after you have access? You know, think about how you're going to build that story so that you can get to that ask in the end and move the person's mind and heart along with it. So end in a way that includes an overall point and offer a solution. Offering a solution is just one of the keystones of any meeting that you're going to have with an elected official, any conversation. They want to know what you want, and they want to know what they can do for you, and they want to know what you can do for them. So, you know, offering a solution actually can help them do their jobs better. And what also helps is to show that the vision we have, access to CF modulators, it's possible. It's been achieved in other countries. We can do it too. Know your audience. So the most important aspect of creating that powerful story is resonation, making sure that it resonates with the person that you're speaking to. So in terms of meeting with an elected official, there's a lot of information out there. We also can help you find that information. But at the end of the day, the best advice is to look that elected official up, read their bios, Google them if you have to, and try to find something about them that you can relate to. And that's always a good opener. And always focus on conveying a message that is relevant to your audience. So, you know, if you're meeting with the Minister of Health, you're going to have a more relevant message just by nature of our ask, which is access to medicines. However, if you're meeting with the Minister of Agriculture and asking them to support our access to medicines call, you may need to warm the ground a bit more to get to that point of relevance. You may need to find out if they have a connection to CF. You know, you may need to ask people in the community, have you met with this person? And again, you could always come to us and we can help you learn more about that elected official. Another important point is using persuasive language. So creative visual language, use as few words as possible, shorter sentence with varying structure. So, you know, different cadence, keep the interest going, different dynamics. And you want to be able to use really descriptive examples to demonstrate how CF has impacted your life. So for example, you know, I spend 2 hours of treatment before breakfast a day, or I spend 2 hours of treatment a day, and that really impacts my ability to participate in sports, to go to school, to work, you know, but really demonstrating with tangible examples the impact that CF has on your life. Again, more imagery, use words that help them paint images. Be inclusive. When you're telling your story, you're of course going to say I, but maybe when you start to go to solutions, you start to talk about we. Because when we use words like us and we, we're talking about doing things together. And that's what we want our politicians to do. We want them to work with us to get access to these medicines. Throw in a few questions, you know, ask them what they think of your ideas, and you know, help them think that your ideas are their ideas. That's a really effective, that's when you know your communication has been effective, when that person sitting across from you, that elected official, starts talking back at you and describing your ask in their own terms. And ask rhetorical questions for an element of intrigue, or just to drive home a point and the reality. Can you imagine what it's like to take 100 pills a day? Well, I've had to do that for the last 10 years. Write, prepare, and perform. We always recommend that you write your story down first and practice it. We have a lot of information on our website that you can use in terms of facts and figures. And remember one thing, it can be an emotional time to share your story. And you control your emotions, but they don't control you. Emotion can be a good thing when tempered with reason, but sometimes we just naturally emote. And I think that's important for politicians to see too, because the reality is there are a lot of emotions involved in living with cystic fibrosis. And if you want them to feel your story, part of that is emoting. Practice, practice, practice. And unless you're presenting to a committee or a caucus, stay away from slide decks and PowerPoint like what I'm doing right now, and just, speak to them. They really are not, it's just not a format that they often receive a formal presentation unless it's at committee. Although if you're meeting with a public servant, a drug program manager, sometimes a deck would be appropriate then. Just creating a powerful presentation, time yourself, make sure that you can get it done in 30 minutes. Always ask at the start of your meeting how much time you have, because often politicians can get pulled away. So you want to be able to tell your story in 30 minutes, in 15 minutes, in 5 minutes, and still get that ask in, and always be prepared with an elevator pitch. So that's something, it's a story that is usually about 20 to 30 seconds long, usually no longer than 60 seconds, hence the name. But it's what you, when you craft your story and you really hone it, it's the bones. It's what puts everything together. And the reason you need that is sometimes a politician is going to say, I know I promised you a half an hour, but I've got 3 minutes. I got to get to a vote. So in terms of the elements of an elevator pitch, again, brief, no more than 60 seconds, tailored for your audience, like any story. Persuasive, you can still be persuasive and succinct. And it's outcome solution based. And I think that's really important in an elevator pitch, because they want to get to the point right away. What can I do for you? And oriented toward the ask, so building toward that ask, and you just practice it over and over again, and it sticks. So my final slide here is just an example of an elevator pitch. I'm not going to say all of this, but what I wanted to demonstrate is it's possible to tell a story in, a few short parts, enough to fit on one slide, very small font. So start with your introduction. Hi, I'm so-and-so, I live with cystic fibrosis, and that's get to your hook. State the problem. This is the problem. These drugs are available in other countries, but we can't get them. There's red tape in Canada. It's got to stop. Agitate the problem. As I mentioned, there are already 40 countries that have approved this drug. What's wrong with Canada? Why is it taking so long? Offer a solution. Right now, our governments are negotiating with the manufacturer. Could you speak to the minister about providing access? Would you support us in getting access once we get the Health Canada approval? Add value. I'd love to feature your support in my social media channels. If you ask the minister a question or provide a statement in the legislature, please let me know, and I will share it to show your support. So, these are all just quick things. It's a structure that you can use to craft your elevator pitch. And we actually have some people here who are very good at telling their stories. And with that, Abby, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so I have met with a few MLAs and an MP as well. And actually, Lily and I recently met with our MP together because we live in the same electoral riding. And so I really liked what a lot of the ways that PowerPoint outlined telling your story. I think there was lots of good advice in there. But one thing I think is important to I guess, envision when you're meeting with your MP or your MLA or any elected official, like, it doesn't have to be a presentation. It is more of a conversation. So you're not necessarily like in there and you have 30 seconds to deliver a great elevator pitch. Like, you want to be succinct and concise, but you also keep in mind, these are people, like, they're elected officials, but they are people just like you, and they are not in any way, above you. And you can just speak to them like one-to-one, like you're both normal people, and it's a conversation. So I think it's really good to go into a meeting with that in mind, because it makes you less nervous. And I think a lot of people, it's very nerve-wracking to go in and tell this emotional story to an elected official or to somebody who's in a position of power, or it seems like they're in a position of power. So just keep in mind that you're on the same footing and it's a conversation. And I think in terms of telling your story, I mean, for better or for worse, I have a pretty dramatic story going in. And I mean, my twin sister had a double lung transplant last year, and I started Trikafta. So it's a very strong contrast. But even if your story is, you know, not as dramatic, it still is. I promise you, like your story is still important. Everybody with CF has a unique story, and I think it's important to not downplay it. I think as people with CF, we're very used to downplaying all the stuff that we go through, and we're used to kind of acting like it's fine, and it's okay to not act like it's fine because it isn't. So that's another thing I would keep in mind. But I think the reason why Lilia and I work really well together when we're meeting with these elected officials is that we bring different strengths to the table. So I definitely am more, I don't tend to get super emotional when I'm talking about my story, even though it is an emotional story. And then Lilia, not to say she gets overly emotional, but she can definitely bring that like kind of heart into it. And I think that's really important to have both. And not to say like we both are bringing the facts of our story in as well, but I think that that blend is really, really good to have. And I also do think there are strength in numbers. So if you know somebody with CF who is in your riding, it's actually really good to meet together. I think that it does add a message that it's not just one person. There are a few people who are all fighting for the same issue. And yeah, I'm trying to think. Oh, another thing that I wanted to bring up and that Lilia can speak to as well is that if you meet with someone and you both do it together, debriefing afterwards is great. So if you meet with you and another person, even if they don't have CF, you both meet together, discussing it afterwards and going over what you think went well, what you think didn't go well. That is really, really helpful, especially if it's an emotionally charged story, as most of them are. It's really helpful to talk with somebody about it afterwards, and kind of work through what emotions you're feeling. And okay, one more piece of advice that I have, and I know that CF Canada is apolitical, which is completely fine. I don't tend to approach, I honestly am not apolitical when I'm meeting with MLAs or with elected officials. That's not to say I go in and tell them directly, you know, what party I'm voting for or anything like that. But if I am meeting with somebody, I will tailor my message a little bit to the party that I'm talking to. And I think that that was brought up a little bit in the PowerPoint. Just there's certain things that will resonate more with certain officials than others. For example, I know that some parties are not really on board with big pharmaceutical companies. And some parties, you know, probably are more concerned with the financial aspect of how much the drugs will cost. And just important to not necessarily dictate all that stuff in your meeting, but just keep it in mind, like they were saying in the PowerPoint, know your audience. That's really important.
I'm so fortunate that I've gotten to do all these meetings with Abby. And like she pointed out, our team approach has been so strong. I do struggle with emotion in meetings because that's been really challenging for me. And one thing that I really love to do is just really be strong about envisioning a good outcome in the beginning. And then my little tip is if you just like with your hands, it's very subtle, but you can like gently put one hand on either side of each knee. And while you're talking, can just like very lightly and delicately like tap or like kind of rub. It's so subtle, no one will notice, but that bilateral stimulation is really soothing. So if I'm telling a really emotional part, that helps keep me grounded. I think that telling a compelling story is so important. And I like to start strong. At combining other parts of my life into the CF is something that's really been very well received for me. So sometimes I talk about what it was like to be in the foster care system and have a social worker show up to the hospital. That's just something that's a bit personal and it really gets the attention. I think that contrast is a very compelling aspect of storytelling, and that was mentioned before. So I love to show something that's maybe like a situation that was the same, and then before and after Trikafta. So recently I
Yeah.
talked about something that everyone can relate to, which is a camping trip. And I said, before the camping trip, before Trikafta, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't be around a campfire. I was so worried about bringing all this food in the hospital. And then I said, and I went back on Trikafta and I ran around and I did all these things. So that just creates a powerful visual and it's very relatable.
Yes, an example that I used it when I was talking was I remember staying in a cabin with my friends one summer, and the entire time, all night, all I could think about was trying to not cough and wake everybody up. And I just didn't sleep because I was trying not to cough literally all night. And that has never, like nowadays, I don't even think about that anymore. Like I literally do not even consider that as something to worry about. And it's really very, very different. So I agree. Contrast is a really good storytelling technique.
And something so relatable. When I first started telling my story, I told it the way CF people might talk to each other, which is like, what's your PFT? What medicine are you on? You know, you kind of go through like the facts because you're so used to it. But for people without CF, they just looked at me like this means nothing, whereas one of us would know right away. So
Yes.
that's why
Sorry.
telling these kind of life stories has been impactful. And Kim touched on this, but I really, I really love to give a vision of what the future looks like. I talk a lot about what my childhood was like with CF and how so many of the things that I went through when I was little could have been spared. And I always talk about the moment that I found out that I got Orkambi coverage because I had these phone calls with my mom and with a few close friends. And I like to describe the way that they were like, my mom was crying. And she was saying, I wish your grandmother from Bulgaria could have been here to see this moment. And I like to present that as that's an us moment. That's when I like to bring it all in. Imagine what a celebration this could be for us. Like imagine what an achievement. And combining that with some very high positive emotions and ending on that note. And that's sort of a what can I do for you moment. Like you would be a hero to these people. Um, and then a final tip that I have, and I feel like Abby has really taught me this, but it's the art of the follow-up. Um, when questions come up, sometimes you don't have all that time in the meeting. And I really like to focus on that conversational human aspect. But in the emails after, you can provide really specific answers and kind of restate your point. I always restate that vision of like, this is what we could all have together. Like, wouldn't it be an incredible future?
Yes, that is such a good point. And it's really great because I tend to get really fixated on like the facts, which are not always, you don't need to come in with every single fact that you have in your arsenal. That's not necessary. And you can, if you really want to get that information across, you can put that in a follow-up email and they'll have more time to review it when it's written down anyway. And it's great to send a follow-up email in general, even if it's just a thank you for meeting with us, anything like that. So if there's anything that you feel that you didn't get across properly or that was misconstrued or just maybe you just forgot the answer, like that happens, you can put that in a follow-up email and you can kind of clear that up if you're worried about it. So don't worry if you get every single fact, like if you mess up a fact or if you just forget something, that's totally okay. You can clear that up and it's actually really, like Lily was saying, it's great to send a follow-up and kind of continue that conversation.
And I will turn it over, but I have one really final message. And this is the most important thing. Telling my story with CF has been the most challenging thing I have ever done. And also the most incredibly rewarding, empowering, and connecting. I wouldn't have met one of my best friends Abby if it weren't for this kind of work. So don't be afraid. Practice a lot with friends. Have a good support system, and this is something incredibly, incredibly impactful.
Thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly and Cassidy, and then we'll come back for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just love hearing just so many different perspectives on how it just goes to show that there is not one right or wrong way to share your stories. It's just everybody each has their own individual experience, which makes every single time you meet with somebody such a unique opportunity to have the world learn more about cystic fibrosis. And for ourselves, so we tag team our meetings in a bit of a different way because we're a mother-daughter tag team. And before Cassidy was old enough to be in meetings and sharing her story on her own when she was younger, I would be involved in meetings on my own or with other people within the CF community, but was obviously sharing from the perspective of being a caregiver, a mom of a child with CF, and not speaking to it as having the disease myself, while being as close to the cause as I could possibly be as a mom without having it myself. And so that was sort of always my angle on it. And as an entrepreneur myself, I've kind of often spun that business side a little bit into some of our conversations, just recognizing that I understand the financial side of why this is a complicated piece of the puzzle. But bringing the emotional piece of it in, as in, we are all humans. This is human lives that are at stake here. This is not a business transaction, and that will never be okay for that to be labeled as that for anybody who has CF in the world. And so for us, we had a pretty interesting experience with meeting with our elected officials in Saskatchewan a few years ago, where we were fortunate enough to have a number of the incredible team of CF Canada come and join us at the legislative in order to have some meetings. I had a pretty interesting, unique experience kind of leading up to some of this with Saskatchewan is a pretty small place. So we use that to our advantage in our storytelling here, because chances are you're going to bump into somebody that you know somewhere. And like you mentioned before, Kim, Googling and actually knowing the faces of a little bit different in the last year, because we aren't out and about like we kind of were before, but we're all hopeful that this is going to change in the near future, where we can go back to meeting in person and resuming lives. And I had the opportunity, because I had some correspondence with our health minister here and had tried to do as much due diligence as I could to know about him, but all of our communication had been phone or email. So we had never actually met in person, but because I Googled him and knew what he looked like, I ended up being on a flight where he was sitting behind me on the airplane. And it was one of those random, I mean, I don't believe in chance. I believe everything happens for a reason, but it was one of these just unbelievable situations where we had literally been playing telephone tag, trying to get a hold of each other. And all of a sudden I like turn around and realize the health minister sitting beside me on a pretty short flight. So I spent the rest of the flight making everything up in my head about what I was going to say, and then approached him as we were walking off the airplane. And we stood in the airport and talked for half an hour while we were both waiting for our connecting flights. And we cried and we talked about things. And he was very empathetic about our story. And it was one of the most powerful conversations I've ever had. And we were both getting ready to head out on holidays. And this was not at all on the repertoire of what we were planning to do. But I think it just kind of goes to show that you never really know when these opportunities are going to present themselves to just have really real conversations. And like Abby said, these are just regular people. They're living their lives. They're raising families. They have had complicated stories of their own that they can be empathetic to. And I think that was really powerful for me to kind of know the importance of just having a real conversation with somebody and being able to open up and just share the hard things, and also not being afraid to ask about like to ask what we want. And we had a very specific ask when we had our meetings a few years ago in Regina, and that was, will you approve Orkambi in 100 days from now? It was very specific. It was very to the point. It was bold because we weren't sure, like they could have laughed in our faces and said, no chance. But it turned out to be something that was a really positive situation. And obviously the work is still in progress to try to get access to everyone who needs it. But it was definitely a step in the right direction. And I think that definitely gave me a boost as an advocate to feel like the things that you are, even in the uncomfortable sharing of your story, or feeling like you're maybe getting too emotional, or just going through all of that, you get to see at the end what you're actually getting to create and change. And I love that I get to do this with Cassidy and have her be a part of these from such a young age, to see the power of how sharing your story can change the world. Because I think sometimes we forget that the smallest of stories can make huge impact. So maybe Cassidy will share a little bit about how she shares her story in a flip side with what she's doing herself to try to create change, rather than just asking for stuff to happen for us with the lemonade stand. So do you want to start with how you started the lemonade stand and why that's helpful in sharing your story?
Sure. So I was diagnosed at 4 years old, and when I was 5 years old, I decided I wanted to have a lemonade stand to raise money for cystic fibrosis. So I had a lemonade stand, and I only raised like a couple dollars. And then the next year, like more people came, and it was nice to know that people like cared. And then we moved to Moose Jaw, and we had a small lemonade stand. The first year we were there, and we had thousands of people come, and we raised over, I don't even know how much,
$7,000.
$7,000. Yeah, it was very crazy and really nice. And I've just been sharing my story ever since.
So she's kind of been able to use what we have decided that our family is able to do for advocacy, is use something that's a little memorable. So something that people are remembering. Our lemonade truck is all over Saskatchewan, and that has been a piece that has resonated with a lot of our elected officials. We deliver lemonade to them. We keep that in the back of mind. She's known as the lemonade girl here. There's just something different than just sharing a piece of the story that maybe they wouldn't remember. And so we've tried to have that be a piece of something that gets brought up regularly. We stay in touch with them regularly. We send them information. It's not always talking about specifically about cystic fibrosis, but talking about just her lemonade truck, what she's up to. Our elected officials follow up with us. Our premier calls us and asks how she's doing. How is our lemonade girl doing? Like, this has made an impact here. And our intention was to raise awareness and funds for Cystic Fibrosis Canada. That was our intention with it. We weren't sure where it was going to come from, but it's just been something that the momentum has picked up on. And so for us, that's been a piece that we've definitely included in our story moving forward, just because that's the piece that seems to be well known. And so I think if you can find some sort of hook, some sort of common ground of some sort that can be memorable. And I mean, lemonade, like, it's not like we invented the wheel of lemonade. This is not a newfound thing, but it's something. And she was the only person with cystic fibrosis in Saskatchewan that happened to be doing that. And so there was something that has just resonated. And so for us, we are working hard to keep on using touches here and there with lemonade that has really been able to be impactful and given us sort of a lot of different opportunities to show up at things and share our story and talk to officials in different capacities, sometimes really casually, which has also been helpful in being able to just kind of build awareness and stay connected with them.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I might have had a bit of a cry when you were all speaking. So, First, before I'm going to say it again at the end, but I want to thank you so much for sharing your stories. It makes such a difference, and I know you've seen that, but from our end, I want to thank you so much. You guys hit so many, before I get to the questions, you just hit so many important things that I think are good stressing again. You've all stressed about knowing your audience, and that is so important. So Abby, when you said we're apolitical, we are, but we sure as heck know our audience. So what I might say when I go into folks that are pushing pharmacare might be different from what I might say to a party that's all about saving a dime. When we went to see the Premier in Ontario, our advocate who lives with CF talked about the fact that she was the same age as his daughters. So we're always trying to find a relatable moment, which is what you talked about, Kimberly, with the lemonade, whatever we can connect on, the camping that Lilia spoke about. I think something that I wanted to stress for you is don't downplay your situation. You talked about that. You guys as CFers are such a mighty, strong, stoic comes to mind. Like you just do what you have to do to survive. But we don't. And you can see in the pandemic, like the whole world fell apart. You know, we have to wear a mask. Oh my goodness, we have to distance. Do not downplay that. People don't know, and it is a burden. And I think it's important. Sometimes you do want to draw that out too, because it's helpful. And I'm sure you've all done that for different reasons. The other thing is I wanted to lean into what you've said is they don't know what you know about cystic fibrosis. So I laughed when you said if you get something wrong, we get, you know, I've done that. I did it today where I've got to follow up on something, but so they don't know. So I thought you all did such a good job of describing how you might bring that alive for them in relatable ways. And sometimes you do need some of the facts, the right brain, left brain, but sometimes you need to talk to them about what it might feel, Lily, when you said about how your family would feel, what a celebration. And then I loved how you talked about a celebration of us and how you want to be a champion for that. So lots of things. I wrote down other things as well that we can, maybe some of you can circle back to. So I'm going to go to the questions. So the first one is, I'm terrified of sharing my story. I don't even know where to begin. What advice can you give me? Does anybody want to start with that, or I can throw it out? Abby, do you want to take a stab at that? I'm not sure you were terrified of sharing your story, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily terrified of sharing my story, but it is intimidating to share so many personal details with somebody that you have never met. I guess that's an interesting one. Yeah, I guess that the advice that I would give is to you have control over your story. You have control over what you share. And if there are parts of it that you think that would be really valuable to share, but there's other parts that you don't want to, that's okay. You don't have to share every single thing. You can share specific parts of it.
Right.
But I do wonder, I think, Lilia, do you think you would have anything to speak to about that? I feel like you would have really good advice.
I think so too.
I'm not sure that I do.
No worries. Go ahead, Lilia.
You definitely do. And you all mentioned how all our stories are different. But one thing that really has worked for me is that this is something that helps me both in terms of getting comfortable with my story and also identifying what are some of the parts that might resonate with us as humans. So I just have I might gather a group of friends and sit down with them and have a coffee and say, can I practice my story with you? Somebody that I really trust and am safe with. And that's how I have honed my best stories. And that's how, honestly, I come up with some parts that are a bit of like catchy sound bites. Because as I'm looking at someone that I trust, who knows me, when I say something that hits home, you can see it. You can see that reaction, in their eyes, or someone will just, it shows in their body language that it's connected. And so when I do that, I have a chance to gather some safety, gather some support, and get really good feedback on what's working. That's how I've done my best story development. And I mean, that's how stories started. Like
Mhm.
I talked about camping. I picture kind of like humans around a campfire telling stories.
That's great. Kimberly and Cassidy, you've been telling her story for a while now, Kimberly. Have you found, as a mama bear coming in, I'm sure that's been emotional. And so how have you like sort of come at that? Do you just lean into the emotion, or have you had to try to like work with that over time? Like, did you just put your hand up and you wanted to tell the story right away, or I'm throwing lots of questions at you, or did that build over time?
Yeah, it was definitely, I would say it probably took a little while. Like I didn't start sort of sharing her story or even sort of being a part of the whole public advocacy platform for a little while after she was diagnosed, because that initially was just a really, really emotional time. And I think we need to all give ourselves grace as to where you're at in your CF journey, because it does take a while to figure that out. And you learn so many different things along the way. And so much has happened in the last 8 years since she was diagnosed that it feels like a different world than it was then with all of the things we know now. But yeah, it did. It took a while for me to, because I didn't want to go into there and have the hat on of just being this mom who was like panicked about her child. I wanted to go in there in a very calm, yet still using the mom hat as, yes, like I'm a mom, like this will never stop being important to me, but also I'm here for the greater good. She is not the only individual with this. There are over 4,000 other people in our country that have this. And for the people like myself who are comfortable sharing my story, I want to use that as a platform. And for people that don't feel comfortable sharing their story, there are other ways for them to be getting involved without feeling like they have to go through panic-stricken meetings if that is just not in their gifting of something they want to do. But I do think, like even with Cassidy, this is something that we work on, is getting more comfortable. I wasn't always comfortable either, but like Lilia said, the more you practice in front of safe people, and there have been times where I will literally just practice sitting at my computer and Google dictate my story so that it's typing as I'm talking, just to say things out loud, because when you're saying them, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. When you're sharing a story to somebody, it's like you can't really compute everything you're saying and share it authentically at the same time. So that's one little tip that I've used before too, just to kind of gather my story as a whole and to know what tidbits are even coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, I think you make a
sorry,
good
go
point
ahead,
about,
Abby.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, Kim, I think you make a really good point about it does get easier over time. Like it really does. Now I met with, like I said, quite a few elected officials now. And the first time I really had no idea what I was saying. And I'm not, to this day, I couldn't tell you what I actually said and if any of it was relevant or useful, except it actually was, because my experience was still impactful enough. Like just knowing that there is somebody in their, in their voter base, in their constituency who had this experience and cares about this issue is still impactful. And like Kim said, the more you practice, it will get much, much easier.
Yeah. Cassidy, do you get nervous when you go in to speak about yourself, or is it easy for you?
Well, like for some reason, I've always like really liked public speaking. Like I would way rather like speak in front of a really big crowd than do math. And like it's always just come kind of naturally to me, but like haven't spoken in public for a little while. But I've always really liked it, and it's never been like that hard for me.
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
great. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone, to Kimberly's point, like everybody has a bit of a gift. Some people, this would just be mortifying for them, and they have to realize that. And there's different ways to tell your story too. You can write it as well. We talked a little bit about this, but I just wanted to close it off. Lily, I thought you talked really wonderfully about, I forget what it was called, but the hands, like moving your hands and how you move them to, and I know that's based in science to like relax people. And I actually, I wrote it down so I retain it because we all get nervous but I wondered about those moments, and even for those of us that aren't quite as maybe as emotional, and I'm not always as well, Abby, but sometimes all of a sudden when you're talking about something, you don't expect there to be an emotion and you get caught by it. And I'm wondering if you just speak to, and I'll let you all, if you want to, I'll speak to it, but just what you do in those moments, because I think that sometimes for some people that don't want to go, that's why they don't, because they're worried they're going to be embarrassed. It doesn't fuss me, but I know it does many others. And so I wondered if you could just speak. Why don't we go in the same order again? Abby, if you want to go first.
Yes, so I absolutely can speak on this because I don't like crying in public. I don't really like, I don't think there's anything wrong with emotions, but I personally just feel like, oh, why did I show that? So I totally understand that. And I think, so if you're talking and you find yourself suddenly getting emotional, which this has happened to me, you can do two things. I feel like you could just go through it and show that emotion. And that's actually really powerful, honestly. Like emotion is not a bad thing in these types of meetings, in these types of situations. But another thing you could do is just, you could even just explain that you are getting a little bit emotional and just take a minute. And that's not only good for you, but is also quite impactful. The thing is, even if you are trying to stop yourself from getting emotional and it's happening, you can still see it on a person's face. And that's not a bad thing. So I guess what I would like to emphasize to anybody who feels that way is that you might get emotional. And if you do, it's actually completely okay. And it's not embarrassing in any way. It's really not. And you can take a minute, you can just work through it and show it on your face. But yeah, it's not embarrassing. And I get that instinct of feeling like it is, but it's really, really not. And yeah, I'm not sure if that was helpful, but
well, it is as a receiver of people that, like, if they emote to me and I can't, I mean, majority of people are quite moved by it. So you might, as the, I felt that you feel very vulnerable, but it really, as the receiver of somebody watching that, most people are very, very moved. As you said, it can be quite impactful, not to manipulate the situation, but certainly.
Yeah, it's
Lilia,
not manipulative. It's just the reality. Like, it is an emotional situation. Yeah.
Lilia, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, I just want to say it's completely rational to be emotional about this. It's not one thing or the other. It's both.
Exactly.
And I recall one situation that I'll bring up. It was one of the first interviews. This was actually a CBC radio interview. And I got so choked up and so afraid. Those were the emotions going on for me at the time, that I was speaking really coherently. And then at one point on live radio, I don't know what happened, but like my words got switched around. Like I just said them with the opposite letter. Like it just became like a little jumble for a minute. And I just remember breathing through it. I paused. I wasn't afraid to pause. Took a deep breath. I gathered myself and I kept speaking. And when the feedback that I got from that moment that I found very difficult to go through is people said that hearing me struggle and work to regain composure and keep going was something that really showed how truly impactful this was, and also the strength that it takes to share your story. It's not easy, but when I look back on that, I feel very proud of myself for pushing through. I think I'm a bit like Cassidy in some ways, though. I did public speaking quite a lot before, professionally, and that was before any of the medicines. So I used to be trying to speak without coughing because it was a bit of an endurance event. You have CF and you can't breathe. So one interesting feedback I got is that people said, wow, it's so neat that you give these really impactful pauses and it engages the audience. And I laughed because I said, oh, I'm just trying not to cough and trying not to have a bronchospasm. But people thought that was like my signature. So
when CF works for public speaking, yeah.
So in the end, it's okay to take pauses and just to be authentic.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Kimberly and Cassidy, I don't know if you want to add to anything to that. Good.
Sharing our story has definitely been emotional. Having her present with me sharing my story has been a next level of me having to compose myself, because I know you're laughing. We're more in a situation where she's like, Mom, get it together, like, but where I'm sitting there, and I think what has made me sort of get quite emotional is when I see that the elected official is processing all the things we're saying, and they're looking her in the eyes. They're looking her in the eyes. And I remember having this conversation with our health minister a few years back, where I just said, I need you to not say these things to me while she's present. I need you to be telling her why this isn't going to get approved. And I could get emotional right now just saying that, because I was like, this isn't about me. He's right here, sir. Like, you need to be able to look this little girl in the eyes and tell her why this isn't going to happen. And this is exactly what I did and exactly what I said. And it felt impactful, but I did have to take a number of pauses, because I'm like, I could just lay horizontal here right now and cry for the rest of the afternoon, because this is such a big deal to us, but I'm going to compose myself. And I think just sort of putting the ball back in their court a little bit sometimes, so that you don't just get kind of the stock answers. And for us, having them say things to her has definitely had to give them a pause, for them to be able to say, whoa, I'm saying this to a young person. It's different than communicating to an adult.
I was there. It was incredibly impactful. And I think that if people are comfortable with letting their emotions, Abby, to what you said of like, they just may come, I think it can just be very authentic, and kind of, it can be a place of connection at times. I mean, again, not to stress that. Some people, it just would be the worst thing possible for them to have to do that. But I think if you can, that's what the meeting they may remember as well the most. I'm interested in what parts of your stories you think resonate best with government. What have we talked about? One right there is asking them to speak directly to Cassidy, who is in her own right now as a young woman, but and that'll mortify you, Kimberly, that I'm saying that about your daughter, but she is now. She's getting up there. But I'm interested in we're interested, Kim and I, in what do you think has hit the note? What parts of your story? You've talked a little bit about this before, but let's start with you, Abby.
Okay. So I would say two main things about my story are quite impactful, just by the nature of how they are. But the first is that I am a twin. I have an identical twin, and my sister, like I said, went into full lung failure and had to get an emergency double lung transplant in August 2019. So she was on life support for 17 days. She literally almost died. There's no way for that to not be impactful. I mean, honestly, like, that is the most impactful part of the story for sure. But the second part is that the contrast. So the fact that happened to her, and the same year, or like not too long afterwards, I got Trikafta, and we're both healthy now, but the routes that we took to get there are so different. She nearly died. I took 3 pills. That's like, there's just, that was definitely the most impactful part of my story. And the third thing which is, I guess, not my story, but no, it is my story, sorry. And I think my friendship with Lilia has been very impactful. Like, I honestly think it's a super impactful part of the story. Like, we became friends through CF advocacy, and we both started taking Trikafta on the same day. So I would say the contrast between what happened to my sister and what happened to me, and also the similarities between my and Lilia's story, and like our genuine friendship. And both of those things have been super impactful. Speaking of emotion, every time you talk about this, I like well up on that part. I don't know, Kim, we may have to edit this part out. I love good, strong female friendships too. It's really important. Lilia, what do you think has resonated the most now that you've perfected?
I don't know, because Abby just kind of threw me for a little bit. That was so sweet.
Sorry, guys.
I know she's emoting for us, Lilia. Yeah.
This is all fake. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, but I think, and we just laughed there, but there are certain situations in which showing like a bit of that CF humor is okay. I think in small doses, but it's okay. But I think that parts of my story that have really resonated with people are, and I touched on this before, but really specific situations where I kind of create visuals. So I want someone to have a picture in their mind when I'm speaking. An example of this is when I spoke with my health minister, and I was trying to explain to him that even though I've been strong, you know, like you said, and this is so true to CF, we are so strong that we do not often show how hard it is. So I told him this story. I said, listen, I was in the hospital and I was working on this advocacy for youth in care, and I didn't give up. And I told him I would take my IV pole and I would walk it down to the oncology ward to use their computer to do work. And then I would walk with my IV pole, like a bag hanging down and like bruises all over, and walk back. And that's what it's been like for me living life with CF. And I also told that story on the radio. And years later, people tell me that the image of me in a hospital gown walking down the hallway sticks with them, because it's that image. Another way that I used it is, and I mean, this was all very natural, like it's authentic, it's not a put on. But when I talked about preparing myself to cut down my doses of the Orkambi to make it last longer, and I talked about what it was like just staring at these pills thinking, okay, I'm going to start cutting them in half and I'm going to go till the end. And so again, until this day, that phrase has resonated and people still talk about that. So I think creating images, and again, not to shy away from the hard parts, which is the opposite of what I did my whole life. Like I was a very positive, strong person. So it's been a real shift to be able to tell the hard parts. But, you know, I talked about, again, like what it was like to think about getting a transplant. And because I was in care and don't have that quite that supportive family, which sometimes people assume for granted, like just like the health, and what it was like to fear having to go through that alone. And that was I had to really work up to that, to saying that. And this is something that was really important for me, is to only share things like that when I had processed them to a point that felt really safe and comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point too, about processing stuff before you share it.
Yeah. I was just going to say the same thing, Abby. I think that's, I think, you know, Kim spoke earlier about like writing out you've all spoken about that, writing it out and trying to, but I think you'll know kind of if you just want to leave it. I think each person would know their own reaction to something. That leads to one part I wanted to ask all of you is, how has your story refined over time? So Kimberly, you talked a little bit about that, but like, do you just narrow in on particular issues now? Do you just talk about her future, for example? How do you position that?
Yeah, I think her turning 13 this year definitely has shaped some of the current meetings that we've been having, that I've been having, because we've been like fighting what feels like a very similar battle since she was 4. And I know that there's lots of people that have been fighting that in the CF community longer, but for us, this is our story and this is where it is. And I remember when she was diagnosed and being a part of the chapter and being a part of getting to know other CF families and hearing the families that had teenagers, which felt really far off to me at the time, having a young child. And now being in a place where she still doesn't have access to the medications that we've seen coming down the pipe. And she's a teenager now. This feels like it's getting closer and closer to adulthood. And as a mom, I've always been in this place of just staying. You're in this different place because you need to be hopeful for yourself and for your child. And there's this constant balance of wanting to be, we use the term cautiously optimistic very often, where it's like you want to be realistic, but you also need to have that hope in order to keep on going on this. And so definitely the story has changed for sure. Just the medications weren't even available when she was first little. And now that they are available and that Trikafta is about to get approved, it feels like a different kind of story that we're sharing because the hope is there. This isn't just a childhood disease. This is forever going to be an adult disease from this point forward. And we need to gain access to this. So that's definitely been the shaping of my forward, and that she just wants to grow up.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's one thing I would just, I have to reflect this back because you've mentioned it a few times and it's so, I can see how powerful it is, but I feel like you talk about creating a sense of time frame, you know, whether it's about like, you know, when she was 4 and now she's 13, or when it, in the side when you talked about, and you know, this approval is coming in June. Abby and I talked about our Trikafta birthday coming up. So just like centering the story within a timeline, like your personal timeline or their timeline, I think is something that really centers it and again gives that hopefulness for the future.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess you both, for you, Abby and Lilia, your stories have changed so much in the last year. You know, you're coming up to your anniversary, so I'm assuming that has reshaped the way you tell your story again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started doing this, my story was a lot different because I mean, I wasn't on Trikafta and my sister hadn't had a lung transplant. So it was a very different story that I was telling. And yeah, it's definitely, I also think that for me, turning 30 has been it's a pretty big milestone for CF. I mean, when I remember looking up my life expectancy when I was 8 years old, and back then I think it was like 30, it was in the 30s. I can't remember exactly where, in the 30s, maybe 37. And I couldn't even envision being 30. And not just because I was a kid, it's because I literally wasn't sure I was going to make it to 30. And so I think that is another, yeah, those two timelines, like turning 30 and then also having my Trikafta birthday. Like the birthdays are very impactful this year, for sure.
For sure. Well, thanks very much. It's a really good discussion, and I want to thank you guys so much for sharing your tips and tricks and being vulnerable and sharing your story again with us today. And I know you'll help a lot of people. We hope others will join and tell their stories across the country, those that are comfortable, and do that through our meeting challenge. And there's information that people can find on our website to that effect. And that's running now and we'll run up to June. And then we're not done. That's our meeting challenge, but we'll still need stories to be told over and over again. And I feel very optimistic that you've paved the way and others have before. And we're at such a time of great change for this disease. So you'll be able to tell another story again. And so thank you so much to everyone. Thanks, Kim, for your remarks. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach us at info at, oh, now I'm going to screw that up, at advocacy. No, info at, now I've just screwed that up.
Advocacy at cysticfibrosis.ca.
Yes, advocacy at cysticfibrosis.ca. And I do work there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. It was really